Sveiki, TV3 žiūrovai. Šiandien pirmą kartą pristatytas Lietuvos gynybinės galios tyrimas. Jis atsakys į klausimus, ar Rusijai užpuolus mūsų šalį ji būtų apginama, per kiek dienų rusai galėtų užimti Lietuvą ir kiek reikia išteklių, kad galėtume nesibaiminti dėl Lietuvos saugumo. Šiame tyrime dalyvavo ne tik mūsų atsargos karininkai, bet ir Jungtinių Valstijų 4 žvaigždučių generolai Benas Hodžesas ir Philipas Breedlove. Tad kaip mes gintumėmės nuo Rusijos, ko mums dar trūksta ir kaip greitai mums reikia sustiprinti savo gynybą, šiandien ir kalbame su tyrime karo eigą modeliavusiu, buvusiu NATO pajėgų Europoje vyriausiųjų vadu generolu Philipu Breedlove. Sveiki. General, war games shows that a properly prepared Lithuania would only hold out for 6 days. But what happens after that? Russia invades Lithuania?
Well, I would hope not, because Lithuania is a part of NATO, and I would hope that NATO would respond as quickly as possible to prevent a full-scale invasion of Lithuania.
But we will hold only 6 days. Yes,
every war game points out different outcomes. 6 days may be the right number. It may be a little less, it may be a little more. I think that rather than just talking about one number, I think what we have to understand is Lithuania cannot hold out by itself without NATO eventually responding. And these war games that I've been a part of here very recently are trying to determine how does Lithuania improve its ability to hold out long enough for NATO to get here.
So, did I understand correctly that without air defense, there is no way we could have resisted Russia? What kind of air defense would we need to be able to protect our country and our airspace?
Well, let's just back up a little bit and talk about what we've learned from the Ukraine war. And that is, if you can't defend your airspace, you're going to end up in this very ugly, attritional, almost World War I style war with Russia, and you don't want that in Lithuania. So we now, as you know, have air policing over our states. This is not air defense, because air policing is a peacetime mission. But in times of increased tension, NATO would raise the alert posture of its air forces to air defense capabilities. And when that is put in place, we're in a better place to begin to defend. But there is not enough air defense forward in the Baltic states now to properly defend. NATO would have to bring more.
So, General, what we have to do? What we have to do? What we have to do to deter Russia?
Well, deterring Russia is a bigger job than just Lithuania, okay? But let's talk about Lithuania. In NATO, the countries often talk about Article 5, which talks about common defense. Okay. But what many forget is there is Article 3. And Article 3 says you must prepare for your own defense, and then, if able, prepare extra capability to contribute to the common defense of the alliance. And so Article 3 tells a nation like Lithuania that you need to look at yourself and determine what you need to begin to defend your own country.
To spend more money on our defense.
Well, of course. Of course. It's about preparing yourself. And Lithuania has come a long way. Let me assure you, when I was the SACEUR from 2013 to 2016, Lithuania was very different, very less ready than they are now. And every day in Lithuania, the right kinds of decisions are being made. But there is much more work to do.
So what we have to buy if we want to hold for 6 days?
Well, again, I'm not sure about this 6-day number, but you know, if in our exercise, we were sort of trying to think about 10 days. But again, the number of days precisely is not important. The idea is that we have to help Lithuania be ready to hold until the larger NATO force can get here. And so you asked me, what do we have to buy? This is exactly what this this exercise has shown us. And things that we know we need to do. Long-range, precise fires to strike the enemy before he gets into your country. Precise fires once he's in your country. Anti-tank capabilities. Anti-air capabilities. And we know that Lithuania is not going to buy an aircraft carrier, or Lithuania is not going to buy 100 F-35s. But Lithuania may buy some rotary wing capabilities to help to hold the force until NATO can bring its capability to bear.
But have I understood correctly that Russia were to build up forces on our border, if Russia were to build forces to our border of the Baltic states, and we have information that it was preparing to attack Lithuania, we should be the first to attack?
Okay, your question is sort of wrapped around. If you have great intelligence, and if NATO has great intelligence that Russia is about to attack, yes, you're going to need to prepare, move your forces, put them in place to defend your border. If Russia begins that attack, I think Lithuania needs to start striking Russian forces in Russia.
But we should strike first, or we should wait Russians?
I would say if the attack begins, you should make the decision to attack.
In your war game, Lithuania is supposed to fight Russia in Latvia. Why should Lithuania fight in Latvia and not in Lithuania against Russia forces?
The borders, and let's not just talk about Latvia, let's talk about Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia, all of them. These borders are just lines on a map when it comes to terrain. The terrain on the ground shapes the way the enemy attacks. If there's a big swamp, the enemy's going to go around that swamp. If there's a ridge line, they're not going to go over the ridge line, they're going to go around it. And so I think what you're describing is that in the common borders of these three nations, there are particular avenues of approach that the enemy will use. And it's best to defend them where they are most easily defended.
Okay, but and how much would Lithuania stand if Russia attacked us a year later and we don't have a German brigade here yet?
So you're asking if a year from now Russia attacks. It's going to be a hard fight. And NATO will have to respond faster to help. But again, importantly, this series of war games and exercises are showing us what Lithuania needs to do for itself to increase Lithuanian capability to slow down the forces. Then that capability will be better when the Germans get here, etc.
But I think that it would be worse that if we don't have Germans here.
Of course. Yeah, of course.
Now, as I understood, you calculated that we have a German brigade here and Polish. Am I correct?
The exercise started off with the worst case, and then it did three more runs where the forces in place were bigger across all three runs. This was done primarily to understand how that would affect how Lithuania invests.
As I read takeaways, if Russia attacked Lithuania, would it behave in a similar way to Ukraine, destroying civilian objects, people's homes, schools, and major cities like Vilnius or Kaunas?
Yes. What we have learned in Ukraine is Russia has not been capable of doing what we would call modern maneuver warfare. And if in our schools, I'll try to explain, we use a couple of terms. One is counter value, which means attacking all of those targets you just mentioned, primarily civilian targets, infrastructure, energy infrastructure, etc. That is counter value. Counter force is when the opponent's military strikes very precisely at your military force. What we've learned in Ukraine is Russia is not very good at doing counterforce. And they spend most of their time counter-value, meaning attacking civilians, civilian infrastructure, and all the things that support a nation.
So is Vilnius defensible at all when it's close to Belarusian border?
If NATO and if Lithuania and Latvia and Estonia, if we take the correct posture in these nations, I believe we can defend Vilnius. If we don't make the right policy decisions to invest or to correct some of those problems we have on the ground, it'll be tough.
And how do you think, will it be casualties in Vilnius?
Of course.
Civilian casualties.
The way Russia fights, look at Ukraine. Look at Ukraine.
You don't mention tanks anywhere. Would we need to buy tanks in order to be able to withstand a Russian attack?
So rather than just pick out tanks, what I would tell you is that our evaluation, our analysis, is that there is a mixture of things you need to buy. Again, we don't recommend that, that Lithuania buy an aircraft carrier. Rather, we think a proper amount of anti-tank weapons, long-range, precise strike, tanks, and possibly some rotary wing. These are all going to be options that would be very beneficial to Lithuania. But it is not one magic thing to buy to make the change. Rather, it is a family of systems that makes you more capable.
But if we are talking about modern warfare, what do you think about drones? Is it useful for Lithuania?
Of course, yeah. So what we have learned in Ukraine is that drones are going to be very important. But remember that Ukraine, what we've learned about drones there is a bit distorted because neither Russia nor Ukraine has been able to establish air superiority over their troops, which is one of the very first things NATO does, is establish air superiority over its troops. And when you have air superiority over a battlefield, drones are going to be used very differently on that battlefield. Right now in Ukraine, because there is no air superiority for either Russia or Ukraine, drones are being used in one way. They would be used differently and even more effectively, I think, if there was air superiority over our own troops.
Such news could frighten or panic Lithuanian population when we are talking that Russia can invade Lithuania in 6 days. How should Lithuanians react to this?
Well, the first thing I would say is Lithuanians need to be proud of the progress that their military has made. You and I just said a few minutes ago, 10, 12 years ago when I was the SACEUR, the situation was different. Lithuania has made a lot of changes, and NATO has made a lot of changes, moving forces into the forward area, American forces here, training in and out. Things have gotten better. So the first thing I would caution Lithuanians is not to panic. Their military is working hard to get ready. Now, as we said before, there is more work yet to be done.
But as I read, we have a lot of money to spend. It's 10 billion for 6 days for ammunition and for other things. It's a huge sum of money for Lithuania. What do you think? Is it enough, 10 billions, to deter Russia?
Yeah, I don't know. You're asking the wrong person. I mean, I might tell you about how much America needs to spend because I've studied it that much. But here's what I do know. First of all, Lithuania is asking the right questions. Lithuania, I think, believes it has investments that they need to make, and your financial situation in this country is pretty good compared to some in the alliance, and you think you are able to spend some of this. So this is, as we say, a good problem to have. So now the problem becomes, how do we most smartly invest our money. And that's what this series of exercises is here to determine.
The smartest way is to buy airspace defense. Am I right?
No, not completely. Again, it is a family of capabilities that's going to make Lithuania more capable. Yes, you need better air defenses. Yes, you need better long-range precise strike so that you can destroy the enemy before he destroys you. Yes, you need some more anti-armor capabilities. You saw what the Javelin did in Ukraine to Russian armor. So there are several things that need to be invested in to continue to build your ability to hold off the Russians.
When we are talking about Lithuanian army, how do you assess the current preparedness of our army? Is it sufficient when we are talking now about current situation?
So I would tell you that my answer is the same for every NATO nation. No, we are not ready enough yet. We all have improvements we have to make. Remember that not for your nation, but for some nations, when the wall fell in late 89, 1990, everybody stopped spending on their defense. We used the term we're going to take a peace dividend. And all of our militaries got smaller, and all of our equipment began to get older, and we did less exercising. And after almost 3 decades now, we have to catch up. All of us, including the United States of America. We have to improve on our readiness. And when you improve on readiness, you have to invest in today, and that is training and exercising and maintenance and repair of the kit you have today. And when you're talking about future readiness, that is buying new equipment and then training your troops on that new equipment for tomorrow's readiness. And these are hard decisions to make. How much do I spend on today? How much do I spend on the future?
What is it that our army lacks the most at the moment if we want to beat back the Russian army?
So you keep building these in a very negative question. I want to remind you, your army is way better than it was 10 years ago. Okay, so we're making progress. But all these things I just mentioned, those are the things we're going to have to be better at. You have to have long-range precise strike. You have to have anti-armor capability. You have to have surface-to-air missile defense of aircraft. And all of these things, I think that you have seen in our exercise, these are investments that need to be made.
Do we need to fortify or mine our borders so that the Russian army can advance as slowly as possible?
Well, the answer intellectually is yes. Again, your 3 nations have some very natural boundaries, swamps, forests, rivers, so forth, along your mutual border with Russia, Belarus, etc. And these can be augmented by things like you talked about. And so, yes, there are some shaping you need to do. But remember the famous Maginot Line. You know, everybody thought that was impenetrable, and Germany just went around it. Okay, so you have to not only adapt your borders, engineering-wise, but you have to cover that with fire to make it effective.
What do you think about Suwalki corridor? Is it our weakest point, or can we somehow preserve it by preventing the Russians from occupying it?
Suwalki is an issue. It's been an issue for a long time. The good news is we've been thinking about it for a long time. I can tell you that your military has plans for being able to give Russia a very hard problem if they come through the Suwalki Gap. Be confident in that. So Suwalki is a problem that we have to deal with, but it's also a problem we've been planning for.
What do you think about Kaliningrad? Is it like aircraft in our Europe?
Kaliningrad is obviously an important place for Russia, and they have a lot of They have a lot of capability in Kaliningrad. I would not want to be the senior officer in charge of Kaliningrad defense if Russia started a war with NATO.
So we have an advance when Finland and Sweden became NATO members?
It's wonderful.
Can we...
We only dreamed about it when I was the SACEUR, that when Finland and Sweden would come to our nation, come to our alliance. And I must tell you, I'm very proud for them to be here. May I just say one more thing about Finland and Sweden, that we all could learn lessons for them long before they became NATO allies. They were NATO partners. They began exercising with NATO. They began training to NATO tactics, techniques, and procedures. And all of their equipment, their kit that they have bought across the last decade, have been completely compatible with NATO. So the day that their flag went up the pole, it was like a light switch. They were immediately a productive part of NATO. They contribute security rather than require security.
Especially Finland, maybe.
Well, both, but Finland for sure.
Can we call now Baltic Sea NATO's lake?
No.
Why?
You have to earn that. Yeah, we could say it, but if the Russians are still steaming and running their submarines around in there as they wish, it's not a NATO lake. What needs to happen is that we adapt a strategy that ensures NATO controls the activity in that body of water. Then we can call it a NATO lake.
Let us talk about the assistance of NATO allies. Would it really only take 6 days? Because Ben Hodges said that it would take at least 2 weeks to get NATO allies here in Lithuania.
This is exactly why I keep twisting when you use the number 6. I would never use that number. The number is somewhere between 2 and 2 weeks, 2 days and 2 weeks. But here's the part that we don't talk about. Air power can be here in hours. Look at what we did in 2014 when the United States sent U.S. aircraft to fly cap over the Baltics. From when I commanded it to when it happened was less than a day. Less than a day aircraft were here. But that's because we had a policy decision. The hardest part is getting the policy decision. And so what Ben is talking about is it could be 2 weeks to get the heavy forces arriving from NATO. If we have enough intel that we can have ships nearby, we can have NATO fires from ships early. If we get the policy decision and the intel early, we can have NATO air power here. But even if we have an early decision on heavy forces, that's going to take time. And I think that's what Ben Hodges is talking about.
But you know very well that the Article 5 of NATO is activated by politicians. It would take a country-by-country decision. Can it take more than 2 weeks?
It could. Yeah, it could. I don't think it would. If Russia crosses a NATO border, how many times have you heard the Secretary General and the President of the United States say, we will defend every inch of NATO? How many times have you heard them say that? I don't think that in the case of a major Russian incursion into NATO territory, that it's going to take 2 weeks. But may I also assure you, just like in 2014 when the NAC would not make the decision to put aircraft over the Baltics, the United States unilaterally put aircraft over the Baltic nations. And that's because to the United States, Article 5 is not only a collective defense treaty, but we have in our mind that it is, back when I was there, 27 individual bilateral agreements to defend our allies. And that's what we did in 2014 when we put U.S. airplanes over the Baltic nations. And as you saw, in less than a day, 3 other nations joined us. And then in less than a couple of days, all of NATO joined us in flying those caps over the Baltic nations. And I would see decisions rolling out very similar to that in the future.
But you know that we will have US elections and President Trump, it's a little bit, it's like a danger for Europeans. What do you think about this political view?
So I will not defend Trump's words. I just won't defend them because I don't agree with some of them. But let's look at history once again. Trump, back in his first presidency, was talking about pulling forces out of Europe and all that. You remember these words? But here's what actually happened in his 4 years as president. The U.S. troop presence in Europe grew, increased, as we were moving forces into your country and other countries. U.S. spending in Europe increased, and U.S. exercises in Europe increased. So for all of the words that Mr. Trump said during his first presidency, troop presence, spending, and exercises all increased in Europe. So why do I bring this up? Mr. Trump is going to do and say things which are going to occasionally not make people happy. But I think we should look at what history shows us he's actually going to do if he's a president. And if the first presidency is a good indicator, I would caution everybody to take it easy.
Do you agree with these words that Europeans are free riding when we are talking about defense, about security, about spending money on defense?
No.
Why?
Because Europe is picking it up. What now, 23 nations are over 2%. We have nations like Poland that are 4% or more. Europe is not free riding. There are countries who are spending far too little on their defense. Yes. But I wouldn't describe it as you described it. Europe is headed in the right direction. When I was a SACEUR, there were 4 nations that were spending 2%. And you know there's a second part of that rule that nobody talks about. It says 2%, and then 20% of the 2% has to be spent on new kit and equipment, modernizing your force. When I was a SACEUR, there was 4 nations spending 2%. One of those nations was spending everything on personnel and almost zero on equipment. So it's about making the investment, but also making it appropriately.
Do you agree that the weakest point of NATO is politicians?
I'm not going to say that.
Okay.
I'm going to say this. In NATO, when it relates to a future conflict, I would look at what's happening right now in Ukraine. And in Ukraine, NATO is giving a lot of military things to Ukraine. But they have not, NATO has not, and the United States has not decided to give Ukraine what they need to win. NATO and the U.S. are giving Ukraine what they need to not lose. And I think that because NATO and the United States is deterred when it comes to Russia, we are not making decisions to have Ukraine win because we intellectually and morally can't understand what a defeated Putin or a defeated Russia looks like. They keep threatening nuclear war, and we have taken that aboard. In America, we use the phrase, we have taken counsel of our fears, and we are not, at this point, giving Ukraine what they need to win.
Can a small country like Lithuania really stand up to a huge Russian army without more help from NATO?
For a very short time, yes. In an enduring way, like a prolonged war, no. NATO will have to do what I fully expect NATO to do, which is honor its treaties, honor Article 5, and defend any of our allies. Remember what we said earlier. What is our president and what did the former Secretary General say over and over and over? We will defend every inch of NATO. I expect we'll live up to that.
Do you think that if Russia really wanted to dismantle NATO, it would attack the Baltic states first? Or could it be said that the Baltic states are the weakest or most dangerous part of NATO?
Well, I'll agree that people have said that Russia will attack the Baltic states first. I think that that is a course of action that I think Russia would put very high on their list. But I would not necessarily assume that. For instance, where did Russia fire missiles where they landed on NATO soil? Romania and Poland have both had Russian missiles land on their soil. And so,
but they are neighbors to Ukraine.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but let me tell you that, you know, that spit of land that goes down to the river in Romania, the Danube, and that very thin, narrow piece of land, Russia fired into that narrow piece of land. And they know that their weapons are not very accurate. So do you think they were concerned about hitting Romania at all? I think not. Maybe not. So I would just say that, yes, a course of action that is always talked about is Russia may try to dash through the Baltic states. But Russia has also shown what I would call some very poor judgment, and they appear to not be too worried about firing into Poland or Romania.
And if Russia were to make a truce or peace with Ukraine, how long would it take before Russia would be able to attack the Baltic states?
Now I'm just going to offer you my opinion.
Yes.
The Ukrainian military has mauled, has really caused damage to the Russian army. And you can use whatever estimates you want. But the fact of the matter is their very best forces have been nearly eliminated, and now they're being replaced with very old equipment to reconstitute those forces. So I think that Russia will have to wait several years to try to rebuild their forces. I think that Russia recognizes that Ukraine, a nation that partially demobilized because we signed an agreement with them and Russia signed an agreement with them in 1994 saying we would all protect their boundaries. They demobilized and their military was not in very good shape. And Russia attacked them, and Ukraine has destroyed a lot of the Russian army. I don't think Russia wants to take on the rest of NATO right now. They will need time to get fixed.
But if Russia were to attack the Baltic states, would it attack all the three states at once?
I don't know. Some people believe that Russia would just grab Narva. You know, Narva is this place that everybody thinks it's a Russian place. Let me tell you, I've been to Narva, and they don't think they're Russian. They think they're Estonian. But some people believe that would be the part they would grab to try to bust up NATO. I don't know. I think the important thing is what Lithuania is doing. And all three of the Baltic nations need to be doing the same, and I see some activity that is good. Lithuania is taking the worst case of they will attack us, and how do we defend ourselves, Article 3, until NATO executes Article 5, or sovereign nations like America start acting in a sovereign way and bring their forces. And so I think this series of exercises that we have, I have been a part of and advising, but this group has been doing with your military. These are incredibly important exercises to say, how do we do that? How do we hold the line until Article 5 happens?
And what about the NATO countries in Western Europe, which spend comparatively little money on their own defense? Is Europe capable of defending itself against Russia without US help?
So I would have said before Ukraine, there
was a different situation.
Yeah, there's a different situation. Now that the Russian army has been beaten up, I would say today, Russia is not in a good place to take on Europe. Not. 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, we might need to be concerned again.
Can the Baltic countries get the attention of the United States when it now focused on China?
So I love to answer this question because I answer it very similar to the Trump question with facts. So since we have, quote unquote, made the shift to the Pacific in America, zero assets, American assets, have left Europe and gone to Asia. Since we made the shift to Asia, just like I said before, our forces have grown in Europe, our spending has grown in Europe, and our exercising has grown in Europe. So, yes, intellectually we understand that if a war kicks off in Asia, that's going to divide assets and cause issues. But no, I don't think that Europe needs to be worried that America is going to forget about Europe. Because I'll say it just one more time. Since we made our shift to Asia, our forces, our spending, and our exercises in Europe have increased.
And maybe the last question. What do you think, and do you think we are heading for a world war? Because it seems that warmongering dictators are trying to change the world order.
Hard question to answer. I'll say it this way. When we show weakness in the West, I think the chances of a world war increase. I think right now, Iran, North Korea, and China are watching how the West reacts to Ukraine. And I think they see a certain amount of weakness. I think they see that when Russia threatens the West with nuclear exchange, the West backs up. And so what does that say to North Korea, Iran, and China? We all need to have nukes to threaten the West because that's how you handle the West. And I think that we have to be intellectually and morally capable of considering the fact that we have to show force to Russia. Famous quote, I think it comes from Lenin. He says that when you approach your enemy, fix your bayonet and then press your bayonet into your enemy's belly. And if it is soft, press further. If it is hard, step back. And right now, I think we're showing soft belly to Russia. At some point, we're going to have to decide that we're not going to back up.
Let's hope that for a successful outcome for us and for Western powers. Thank you for our conversation, General.
Thank you.
Dėkui Jums, mieli žiūrovai, už dėmesį. Iki pasimatymo.